This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and pleased to have as our guest in the studio today, Nancy Ruppert. Nancy is a graduate of the University of Florida and earned her master's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in nursing, and hails now from Montgomery County. We'll come back to some more of the details here shortly, Nancy, but welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real treat to have you here. We're going to be talking, as you and I discussed a little bit before we came into the studio, about how you got into beekeeping. Let's start, though, with your nursing background. That's what you were at the University of Florida for, is that right?
Yes, and I got my bachelor's in nursing there. Got my first nursing experience in Greenville, North Carolina, because of a training experience I had had there prior. Really liked the environment, loved the people in North Carolina, decided to move in 1984. Began my nursing career in 1985 in Greenville. Already had decided to go to graduate school to train as a nurse practitioner, which I did 3 years later, and moved to Montgomery County to serve the underserved people in rural health as a family nurse practitioner in 1991.
And you had some ICU experience, have I got that right?
Yes, I was an ICU nurse in 2 tertiary care hospitals, big hospitals, while I was going to school at Carolina. In both of those facilities, I worked as an ICU nurse, and that was extraordinary, useful experience. Taught me that life is short.
And unpredictable.
And unpredictable, yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Tell us about why you went into nursing and how it turned out for you.
I'd have to say that had to have been divine intervention. That wasn't my goal as a child, but I became more and more interested in science and biological sciences. And while I was in junior college, worked in an emergency room at a local hospital, and that inspired my interest in healthcare. So I went to nursing as a major in college and then went into nursing from that.
Did you enjoy your nursing experience?
It was an exceptional experience for me. Lots of life lessons, lots of good people, certainly made me a nice living. I have no regrets whatsoever about doing that, and still have my nursing license 30-something years later.
But you're not spending a lot of time these days nursing, at least not nursing humans, huh?
That's correct.
Different kind of nursing, maybe?
Different creatures, yes.
Tell us about it.
I was interested in beekeeping back in the 1990s, partly because I love honey. Noticed bees
love honey as in eating honey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honey makes the world sweeter all the time. And became fascinating watching bees work. So I decided I wanted to learn more about those creatures and went to a class to learn about it. Decided, yes, I want to start this as a hobby, and just gradually increased my knowledge, but also my interest in bees. At the same time, things were changing in healthcare delivery, which began to dampen my interest in human healthcare.
Changing in what ways?
It was more about budget care, about money care, rather than healthcare. You know, we got to meet the bottom line. I understand how cost is an integral part of human health care, but the personal connection started giving way to the finances, the testing, those things that are not part of the interface of real human health care. And so as my interest in beekeeping increased, I started thinking about, well, could I ever make a living at something related to bees and beekeeping? And at the right time, the right person retired and opened a position that I was very interested in having. And I'm fortunate to say I have that position now as an apiary inspector with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services.
Well, I gather that you've met a lot of people along the way that have helped you in one way or another.
I can't even describe how much of a benefit that has been. You know, when we take on a job, we think about the benefits and what we're expected to do and experience. But I could never have imagined the incredible number of wonderful people that I've encountered and have yet to encounter. And they've taught me so much, not just about bees, beekeeping, but about humanity, about addressing difficulties in life and overcoming them. So I'm a very blessed individual.
And that, of course, leads very nicely into one of the songs that you've selected, You've Got a Friend. Tell us about it.
I chose that song because I like James Taylor and his music, but also because friendships and relationships are very important to me. As humans, we've got to have those connections. And when you really think about what makes a real friend, there may be folks who don't feel like they have many. I think if any of us can sit and consider that we have one or more true friends who are there through thick and thin, through our joys and our burdens, we're very fortunate people.
And you speak from experience, obviously.
I've been very lucky to have all kinds of experiences with people in various kinds of relationships, yes.
Well, let's hear the song, You've Got a Friend, by James Taylor.
When you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand, oh yeah, yeah, you've got a friend.
That was You've Got a Friend by James Taylor. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Nancy Ruppert. Nancy, we were talking before we went to that song about your apiary inspecting position and your own beekeeping, or at least we touched on it. Let's hear a little bit more about what it is about beekeeping that you find so intriguing.
There are multiple elements of beekeeping that are intriguing to me. Part of it is the amazing things that honeybees can and will do. Another is the incredible variety of people who choose to be connected to beehives that I get to meet as part of my inspection process. And what I do is primarily regulatory, but there's a lot of teaching and instruction, not only of, say, school children, but civic groups, beekeepers who want to learn more, and even at the apiary itself, as I'm going with a beekeeper through their hive to learn more about what's going on in that hive that we can see.
Before you go on, tell us what an apiary is.
An apiary is any location where there are managed bees. Most of them will be in hives of some sort.
I think most of us have heard that line about, I'm not sure exactly how it goes, but honeybees are known for being workers, working all the time.
Yes, and they are. They work all day and even into the night. They don't really sleep. They rest, but they work all night tending to the babies, fixing wax combs and things like that. So they actually choose to work. They want to work. And my position is let them work.
You don't object.
I don't object at all. If they're going to make more of that honey, I love to eat.
You have your own hives as well, is that right?
Yes, I do have currently 15 hives. My goal is more like 10, but...
You've overdone it a little bit.
A little bit. But I'm thankful my bees are healthy, and they do pretty much manage themselves a lot of the time as I'm helping other people with theirs. But because I've learned enough to at least know when I need to check on my hives, that's helped a lot of them survive.
How many bees are there in a hive, typically?
Typically, there may be 50 to 70,000 bees in a single beehive. That would be more of a spring, summer, early fall population. In the winter, they're at their lowest population of about 15 to 25,000 bees. But still a strong enough colony to continue doing the work that they need to do.
In order to survive.
In order to survive, and especially so that people who have large fields of crops that need the pollination, like the almond crops in California are blooming in February. They can't get a bunch of bumblebees or other types of things to pollinate that much. That's why over half of the nation's beehives are trucked to California in early February so that we can enjoy the almonds that have to be pollinated.
So at the peak of 50 to 75,000 bees in a hive, you personally are dealing with, if I have done my math right, somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million bees.
Yes. At one time I chose to become a part of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, and they have an application form, And on there, it asks about your employees. I said, I've got over 500,000 workers.
We hear in the media these days about issues with pollinators. Tell us about those issues with respect to honeybees in particular.
Pollinators are determined survivors, but there's only so much they can handle. Honeybees in particular are important pollinators because about 80% of the pollination that's done in this country and most of the world is done by honeybees because of their survival year-round. But they're under tremendous challenges, primarily through habitat loss that limits the nutritional availability for bees to go and get the food they need when there's lots of asphalt and other things that are not nutritious for bees. But also pests and parasites have been a significant factor in the challenges for honeybee survival. If people who choose to keep bees do not learn more about the management, including pest and parasite issues, it's going to be tough for those bees to survive. That's just where we are in bees and beekeeping right now.
So it's a matter of education and investment of the time necessary to care for them properly.
And if people were more aware that the upfront investment in the knowledge and practice of the skill, that really pays off down the road, then they might be either more willing to invest that time or to say, well, I guess beekeeping is not for me. So you can't really expect a lot of success if you're just going to jump in there, get some hives, put them in your yard, and go about your life without paying any attention to what the needs are for those bees that are in your yard.
Just to make sure we're all on the same page, just tell us briefly what it is that makes pollination essential.
So the saying goes that about a third of what we eat is present because of pollination, and for the most part that's true. So a lot of it is due to our diet, and a lot of the most nutritious things that belong in our diet require pollination to be available to us.
You've touched on some things that strike me as fairly amazing and wonderful. Maybe you want to touch on another song that you've selected, What a Wonderful World.
Yes, I chose that song by Louis Armstrong out of great respect for his talent, especially in the difficult times that he lived through and the racism that was so prominent during that time, but he still overcame it.
Black musician that he was.
Yes, and I love jazz music. It's probably my favorite genre, and he was an excellent example of the talent of jazz music. But I also chose that because I think if we were to really sit down and be serious, in this country, most of us could say, it's a wonderful world. We have the essentials of what we need to survive, most of us do. And then we have additional things that bring us additional joy and life experience. So it's just a way for me to sort of crowd out the negativity that sometimes seeps into your day-to-day life and tends to turn your perspective a little sour.
Well, let's hear it. What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong.
I see trees of green, red roses too.
That was What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. Our guest today is Nancy Ruppert. And Nancy, actually, you and I were chatting while we were listening to that song, and I learned something I didn't know about you, and that is that you were the first and continue to be the only female apiary inspector in the state of North Carolina. Have I got that right?
That's true.
Nancy, how many miles a year do you drive in your role as apiary inspector?
It's been averaging about 35,000 miles per year.
Oh, boy. And that's because your territory is...
about 10,000 square miles.
Uh-huh. Going east to west and north to south. Give us some guidance.
West almost to Charlotte, east to the coast, north to the northern boundaries of Randolph, Harnett, and Lee counties. And everything in between all that. South Central and southeastern, a lot of southeastern North Carolina.
And there are 6 apiary inspectors altogether?
There are 6 total. Currently there are 5 because one retired.
It's hard for me to think about the challenges for honeybees these days without thinking more broadly about things environmental. What's your view on the state of affairs environmentally?
We're still blessed to live in a rich environment of, for the most part, clean air, clean water, clean soil. But we only have one earth that all of us can live on. And we have to be more respective of what the science tells us and what population growth could potentially do to the resources that we're still able to enjoy. I think we have a responsibility to use the knowledge that's presented to us to act in a more responsible way so that the clean air, clean soil, clean water that we currently enjoy is still available for the generations of the future. There's some evidence that that might be changing, but I think we have to respect and listen to the scientists who do the good work to help reveal that to us, as well as solutions for what we individually and collectively can do.
I was reading just yesterday an article about somebody who was giving a talk on the importance, the value, particularly in a democracy, of paying attention to experts. Really, a functioning democracy is dependent on paying attention to those who know what they know.
Yes, despite the difficulty of some of the truths that come to us, those people, that's what they aspire to learn. That's what they've spent years of study learning. And for our own good, we need to respect and heed that. It's not that difficult to be environmentally responsible.
Do you have any heroes in the environmental realm?
There's so many of them. I don't know that I could single out any, because there are people even today who are doing great work whose names we wouldn't know off the top of our heads, and people over time, like the fellow who started the first Earth Day almost 50 years ago, that even before their time were willing to push Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, a landmark document about what was happening, and a lot of changes came about as a result of that. So it just shows you that a determined person with the right attitude and the right science behind her or him can continue to make a difference.
Before we go further, Nancy, why don't you set me straight on what that saying is about honeybees?
Busy as a bee.
Busy as a bee.
One? That was it.
Good. Thank you. I want to shift gears if we could, Nancy. You come across as a sensitive, loving person, and I'd be interested in hearing, if you wouldn't mind, just a little bit about your family background that maybe explains part of that.
This might be helpful to some of your listeners who are going through real difficulty with their family unit and the dynamics that sometimes make family life a struggle.
You were the fifth of 8 children, as
Correct.
I understand it.
My parents had 8 children together, and still divorced after that when I was about 6 years old. And I was one of 4 that went to live with my father. Very challenging, because he was a real disciplinarian, and grace and love were not a typical part of his behavior. After a few years of those 4 of us living with my father, we went to visit my mother for a summer vacation and decided we wanted to stay there. And so she raised the 8 of us almost by herself until we got old enough to leave home. But during that experience was such a role model of what love and grace really can do for people. And it wasn't just that she told us we need to love people even when they seem unlovable, but showed us that unconditional love and taught us that that really ought to be part of what our lives should include. I am not a good example of that on a day-to-day level, but she reminds me that I have to continue to work on that. I'll keep practicing. It won't ever get perfect, but we all need grace and we all need love. So if we don't show it at least part of the time, how are other people going to realize that that needs to be a part of our lives? So people who are in broken homes or tough situations, with the right connections and people to help steer them and the love and grace that we all need, can actually overcome those obstacles.
And you continue to be very close to your siblings, as I understand.
Yes, all 8 of us. Now, we fought so loud growing up that nobody wanted to move near us. I lived in Central Florida while it was really, really growing, but not anybody moved within probably at least a quarter mile of our house because we're so much noise with 8 children. But we learned how important we are to each other and the love that blood relationships bring and just the unconditional love that siblings should have, again, because of the example of our mother, that really just makes it tremendous family unit that not many people are blessed to have like that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Nancy. Maybe we'll go right from there, given our shortness of time, to your telling us about this third song that you've selected. I think it probably fits in pretty well here. It Is Well With My Soul.
Yes. In our current world, we're taught to value our jobs and our material wealth, and those are certainly important. But it's the riches of the soul that really get you through life. It's the depth of the soul that sometimes is never even massaged or touched upon that really people can miss out on a tremendous amount of life meaning. So when you're fortunate enough to be able to say, it is well with my soul, that the deepest part of me is okay, and for many of us that includes a higher power, whom I choose to call God, that makes it okay, because no matter how much I mess up, I have grace and I can say, it is well with my soul, so that if I lose my house, my family, my job, if my soul is still intact and healthy, I can overcome any of those obstacles.
Well said. Well, Nancy, it's been a real privilege to have you here with us today. Thank you for coming in.
Privilege is mine. Thank you for having me.
We've been talking with Nancy Ruppert, apiary inspector and beekeeper extraordinaire, not to mention somebody who has got it together in her own personal life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hear the song, It Is Well With My Soul, and we're going to hear a version by Chris Rice.
When peace like a river attendeth my way,